It began with a coincidence, or at least, that's what the palace would like everyone to believe. Two brothers, two continents, two missions, and 1 week that once again threw their fragile relationship into the spotlight. Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, on his way to Toronto. Prince William, Prince of Wales, stepping off a plane in Brazil. Two royal sons chasing their own causes, but somehow, inevitably, colliding again in the court of public opinion. The headlines came fast. Harry tries to upstage William. It was a familiar rhythm, another chapter in a story that refuses to rest. But this time, Harry didn't stay silent. Before we dive in, there's something I need to share with you. Over the past few days, thousands have watched these stories unfold, but most haven't subscribed. If you're one of them, I invite you now to join us. Subscribe to Crownverse so you never miss the next chapter in this unfolding royal history. Now let's go back to the moment everything began. It was early November. William had just arrived in Brazil for the Earthshot Prize, his most important environmental project of the year. Cameras followed his every move. World leaders, scientists, and activists gathered around him. It was supposed to be his week. But just as the first headlines from Brazil rolled out, another announcement appeared, this one from across the Atlantic. Prince Harry would be in Toronto for several public engagements connected to veterans, military charities, and the Invictus Games. 2 royal tours, 1 news cycle. And within hours, social media erupted. Was this a coincidence or a calculated clash? Commentators quickly chose sides. Some saw it as bad timing, others as deliberate strategy. One tabloid called it a royal showdown at 30,000 feet. Another said, Harry couldn't resist stealing his brother's thunder. Harry's team moved fast to respond. In a rare public statement, his spokesperson denied any attempt to upstage William, explaining that the timing had nothing to do with rivalry and everything to do with security. The statement read that Harry is not afforded the same level of security and protection as other members of the royal family. Because of that, they said, the Duke's team is required to release event details at the last possible moment, based on risk assessments and advice from private security. In other words, his announcement wasn't late, it was restricted. It was a carefully worded defense, calm and measured, but beneath it lay a truth that still divides public opinion. Harry no longer lives within the royal system, and that means he no longer plays by its rules. For many, that explanation was enough, but for others, the overlap looked far too convenient. One royal commentator, Richard Fitzwilliams, told the British press that the clash was not accidental. In his view, Harry's team knew perfectly well when William's trip would take place and deliberately chose to make headlines on the same day. That claim remains unverified, based only on opinion. There's no direct proof that Harry's schedule was designed to conflict with his brother's trip. But it fed the narrative that the brothers' rivalry has moved from private tension to public chessboard. And to understand why that idea carries so much weight, you have to look back. The relationship between William and Harry was once the most admired sibling bond in the world. 2 boys walking behind their mother's coffin. 2 men standing shoulder to shoulder at each other's weddings. 2 future leaders of a family that seemed, for a time, untouchable. Then came 2020. Harry and Meghan's decision to step down as senior royals split the brothers in more ways than one. William stayed to preserve the institution. Harry left to preserve his peace. The rest, interviews, memoirs, documentaries, widened the ocean between them. Since then, every appearance, every speech, every engagement has been dissected as part of an invisible battle for moral ground. So when Harry and William appeared on different continents on the same week, it was impossible for the world not to compare them. William, the future king, in Brazil, highlighting global climate innovation through the Earthshot Prize. Harry, the self-exiled prince, in Canada, focusing on wounded veterans and remembrance. Both noble causes, both rooted in service. But as one royal observer noted, optics matter, and optics don't lie. The timing wasn't just unfortunate, it was symbolic. William representing the future, Harry revisiting the past. William building global influence through diplomacy, Harry anchoring himself to the military world that once gave him purpose. And that symbolism is what makes the story so irresistible. To supporters of William, it looked like Harry was trying to steal the spotlight from a brother finally stepping fully into his father's shoes. To supporters of Harry, it looked like yet another example of unfair scrutiny, a man doing his own work, still shadowed by a system he walked away from. The truth is, as usual, somewhere in the middle. Harry's team insists that the Toronto trip had been planned months in advance. The visit coincided with the Remembrance Day period, which runs every year from November 1 to 11. That week is sacred for veterans and impossible to reschedule. And Toronto isn't any city to Harry. It's deeply personal. It was the setting of the 2017 Invictus Games, one of his proudest achievements, and the event where his relationship with Meghan first became public. Returning there was more than work. It was homecoming. That part is confirmed. The schedule of remembrance events and Invictus planning goes back many months. But still, critics question the optics. Fitzwilliams and others argue that even if Harry's trip was pre-planned, he or his advisors should have anticipated how it would look. They point out that earlier this year, Harry reportedly agreed to share his public engagements with the palace in an effort to rebuild trust, a claim that remains unverified but widely repeated in royal circles. If true, the overlap would appear as either carelessness or defiance. And that, experts warn, could reignite the chill between the brothers, just as it seemed to be thawing. To be fair, reconciliation has always been fragile. Insiders say the king hopes to bring his sons together, at least symbolically, before the end of the year. But each new headline, each perceived slight, makes that goal harder to reach. For the palace, the challenge is even greater. Every royal schedule is carefully choreographed to avoid conflicts of attention. Overlapping announcements create confusion, competition, and the perception of disunity. So when Harry, an independent royal, enters the same news cycle, it's seen as disruption, intentional or not. And yet, there's another way to see it. Some commentators suggest that Harry's overlap might actually be a gesture of alignment, not opposition. His trip, focused on remembrance and veterans, mirrors the royal family's own calendar of tribute. His message of service echoes the same values the crown promotes. Could it be, they ask, that rather than trying to upstage William, Harry was simply trying to show that he still shares the same moral compass, even from across the ocean? That interpretation is purely speculative, but it paints a more nuanced picture. Two men who once walked side by side, now walking parallel paths that occasionally, and unavoidably, cross. Still, the public prefers conflict. Upstaging makes for better headlines than unfortunate coincidence. And Harry knows it. For years, he's lived under the weight of narratives he can't control. In his own words, media stories often twist intent into accusation. But this time, he chose to respond, a rare move that shows just how sensitive this topic remains. In his statement, the Duke emphasized security, an issue that continues to define his post-royal life. Since stepping back in 2020, Harry has fought for police protection when visiting the UK, arguing that his private security cannot access national intelligence. Legal experts confirmed that his requests were denied, leading him to pay personally for protection abroad. That reality explains why his travel announcements are handled differently. His security team decides when it's safe to disclose movements, sometimes only hours before. So when his spokesperson said the timing was truncated, that wasn't just a figure of speech, it was a literal policy. But for critics, it still wasn't convincing. They argue that if the trip had been in planning for a year, he could have adjusted the dates slightly, avoiding the clash entirely. To them, citing security feels like a convenient shield, one that hides a deeper motive: relevance. That claim, of course, is unverified, rooted more in perception than proof, but it touches on a larger question. What does relevance mean to a man who once had the world spotlight by birthright and then chose to walk away from it? For Harry, the answer has always been purpose. He's built his identity around service, first in uniform, then through the Invictus Games, and now through charitable work. But every act of service is now measured against his brothers. William represents duty within the institution. Harry represents duty outside it. And when their causes collide, the contrast becomes unavoidable. The public sees two different brands of leadership, one rooted in tradition, the other in independence. To the monarchy, that duality is dangerous. Two royal voices speaking in different tones can fracture the image of unity. To Harry's supporters, it's freedom, proof that service can exist beyond palace walls. That's why this story matters. It isn't just about travel schedules, it's about identity. Who decides what it means to be royal, the crown or the person wearing it? Every time Harry steps into the public eye, that question returns. And this time, it came wrapped in timing, symbolism, and sibling history. Meanwhile, William's week in Brazil unfolded as planned. He delivered speeches about sustainability, met with local leaders, and toured conservation projects. The Earthshot Prize remains his signature project, the crown jewel of his global image as a modern, eco-minded heir. But even as he stood on stage halfway across the world, the headlines weren't only about him. They were about the brother he wasn't speaking to. That's the paradox of the modern monarchy. No matter how hard it tries to control the message, the story always finds its way back to family. By the end of the week, both tours concluded successfully. Harry's meetings with veterans were warm and emotional. William's appearances were dignified and high impact. Both men achieved their goals. Yet the lingering question remained: who owned the spotlight? If you measure it by press coverage, the answer is both. If you measure it by emotion, it's neither. Because beneath the rivalry lies something sadder. Two brothers who once represented the unity of a nation, now forever split by interpretation. Some believe reconciliation is still possible. Others quietly admit it may never come. What we know for sure is that both men continue to walk the paths they chose, sometimes converging in the most unexpected ways. And when they do, the world stops watching the work and starts watching the wounds. For Harry, this episode might serve as another reminder that independence has its cost. For William, it's a reminder that leadership carries comparison. And for the monarchy, It's a warning that no matter how carefully they choreograph, the ghosts of division still dance in the background. In truth, maybe no one meant to upstage anyone. Maybe two brothers just happened to shine their lights at the same time, and the world, hungry for drama, mistook coincidence for conflict. But perception, in the royal world, is everything. And once it's written, it's almost impossible to rewrite. So, as November fades, and both princes return to their separate worlds, one to California, one to Kensington, the silence between them speaks louder than any statement. It's a silence filled with history, hurt, and hope. The kind of silence that can break or heal. Only time will tell which one it becomes.